The taxi braked so close that the side mirror nearly grazed Emily's shoulder, and the horn cut through the rain like a blade. "Watch out!" someone yelled, but she was already yanking Megan by the coat to dodge the puddle that exploded in filthy water. The crosswalk signal flashed red for pedestrians at Capitol Hill, and the two of them ran, soaked from head to toe, clutching an envelope of resumes against their chests. 10 minutes left, Megan panted, pointing at the time on her phone while dodging a cyclist. The wind carried the scent of freshly ground coffee, and the lights from the shop windows reflected on the soaked asphalt. Emily kept pace, breathless, feeling the hem of her pants cling to her calves and her backpack grow heavier on her shoulders. The interview, finally, after so many, "We'll keep your resume on file." She swallowed her anxiety and picked up the pace. That's when the elderly man stepped into the street, outside the crosswalk, clutching a brown hat like it was a life preserver. A blue sedan honked, skidding slightly, and the driver cursed out the window. The old man stopped mid-road, lost, turning in circles, unsure where to go. Emily didn't hesitate. She shoved the envelope into Megan's hands and darted into the street, raising her arms. "Sir, come with me. It's dangerous." She reached for his forearms, firm but gentle. His coat, made of fine wool, was askew, a button missing, one sleeve turned inside out. His eyes darted around, glassy, his mouth trembling soundlessly. "Emily!" Megan shouted from the sidewalk. "We're going to miss it. We waited weeks for this." "Just a minute," Emily said, guiding the man to the safety of the curb. He was breathing fast and couldn't answer basic questions. Name, address, any contact. The brown hat looked aged, the kind of new that only comes with time, worn leather around the brim, a dark stain on the edge, maybe coffee. "In real life, nobody helps anyone," Megan snapped, impatiently tapping her foot on the soaked pavement as if every drop were a ticking clock. The words came out sharp, brittle, carrying a fatigue Emily knew too well. "I can't leave him like this," Emily replied, her voice low, more to herself than to Megan. The old man was trembling. His hands, though, clutched the hat like it held a memory he refused to let go. She scanned his wrist, looking for anything at all. There, a metal bracelet, discreet, engraved. She tilted his arm under the grey morning light and read a phone number, a name, George Whitmore. "There you go, George," she murmured, raising her phone to her ear after dialing. It rang 3 times. 4, 5. "Whitmore," answered a deep, professional male voice, muffled like it came from inside a car. "Hi, I found an elderly man named George. He seems confused. He's at the corner of Broadway and Pine." Silence for a second, then the sound of rushed breathing and car doors slamming. "Stay right there. I'm on my way." The line cut off without goodbyes. Megan threw up her arms, exasperated. "Seriously, Emily, seriously, you're going to blow it. This is the kind of place that closes the door on the dot." "You can go. I'll catch up," Emily said without looking at her. She took off her coat and draped it over George's shoulders, who now trembled a little less, as if kindness had warmed something more than just skin. She tried asking simple questions. "Do you like coffee? Do you live nearby? Does someone come get you sometimes?" He just clutched the hat and looked away, teary-eyed, like someone trying to tune in to a radio station that no longer exists. 2 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up, headlights still on. The doors unlocked. The driver stepped out first, a man with a security guard's stance. From the back seat came a man in a dark suit, no umbrella, letting the rain soak his hair. His face had that magazine cover quality, polished by good cameras and flawless habits. He strode across the sidewalk in long steps, eyes locked on George, and nearly slipped in the rush, recovered his balance reflexively, but his hand went to his suit pocket, fumbling as if steadying a tremor he didn't want to show. "Dad," the man said, lower than he intended. Only then did he notice Emily standing beside George, her coat on the old man's shoulders and her hair plastered with rain. His gaze flicked quickly, assessing, landing on the phone still in her hand. "I called," Emily explained, unprompted. "The bracelet had the number." The man nodded, his jaw clenched. "Thank you." He looked back at George, touched his father's forearm with practiced care, those gestures of someone who has to remind himself how to be gentle. For a moment, the composure cracked. He blinked faster, as if something was burning behind his eyes. "I'm Paul Whitmore," he finally said, facing Emily. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She stepped back half a pace, suddenly aware of the growing lateness inside her like an alarm. "I need to go. I have an interview." Megan, who had been watching with arms crossed, let out a theatrical sigh. At this point, it's done. Her words landed like a slap. Paul adjusted the hat in his father's hands. "I've got it from here." He thanked her again, this time with a look less executive, more human. "You did the right thing." His voice came out a little hoarse, betraying the vulnerability he tried to mask behind his perfect posture. Emily nodded and ran. Her heart pounded in her throat, each step splashing water. Her sneakers made that wet rubber sound against the stone floor of the lobby as she pushed through the revolving door of the building where the interview was supposed to be. The air inside was cold, smelling of clean glass and expensive cologne. A panel listed the floors of Whitmore Enterprises, minimalist fonts in white on black. The fluorescent lights emphasized the lack of color in her face, and the mirrored wall reflected back an Emily with damp strands stuck to her temples and a water stain at the hem of her sweater. She hurried to the reception desk. The line of candidates was still there, though shorter now, and a security guard was asking the next ones to put away their phones. "I'm sorry, I have a 9-odd interview," Emily said, breathless, showing the open email on her phone, coded with her name and time. The receptionist, young oval glasses, shiny badge, glanced at the clock, then at the list on her tablet. The room closed at exactly 9. "I'm sorry. I was right nearby. There was a situation on the street. An elderly man." "I understand," the receptionist cut in, using a tone trained to avoid offense and deny exceptions. "But the process is strict. No exceptions." A candidate behind her cleared his throat, another adjusted his blazer, and a faint ripple of judgment passed through the air like a draft. 2 young men exchanged smirks. An older woman in a blue suit gave Emily a quick look of sympathy, then turned back to staring at nothing, unwilling to get involved. "Please, it's my first." "Next, please," said the security guard. Not harsh, but final. The turnstile beeped, and a well-dressed woman stepped through. Emily took a step back, then another, as if every inch of floor pushed a no into the soles of her soaked sneakers. The elevator door to the right clicked open, and a small group emerged. 2 men in suits, a woman with a clipboard, another security guard. Among them, a bit behind and walking more slowly, was Paul Whitmore, now with his hair slicked back with his hands, still without an umbrella. He was speaking quietly to the woman with the clipboard, seemed to be giving instructions, but his gaze suddenly cut across the lobby and landed where Emily stood, disheveled, short of breath, clutching her phone with fingers pale from the grip. His eyes widened a fraction, just enough to crack the glass of formality. He instinctively changed direction, ignoring a call, and approached the reception desk. "Wow. It's you. What are you doing here?" The question brought heat to Emily's face, more from embarrassment than fatigue. "I had an interview. I was late." The words came out small, one by one, like they were afraid of slipping and falling onto the marble. The receptionist straightened up, noticing the shift. The security guard glanced at Paul and stepped back half a pace, a reflex of hierarchy. Some candidates turned to watch, sensing something off script. Paul didn't hesitate. "She saved my father from getting hit by a car just now," he said, not loudly, but in a way that made everyone hear. "Because of me, she's late." It was like the truth cracked open a fault line in the cold routine of the lobby. He turned to the receptionist. "Take her name. Emily Carter," she said, almost instantly, surprised to hear her own last name sound important outside of a form. "Emily Carter." Paul nodded to the receptionist. "I want HR to follow up. Schedule another opportunity. Priority." The word had the weight of metal. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore," said the receptionist, already typing on her tablet. "Thank you, but—" Emily began, caught between relief and modesty, hoping her voice sounded steady but coming out emotional. Paul looked at her for a moment. Outside, the rain tapped the glass facade like a whispering crowd. "This isn't a favor, it's gratitude." He adjusted his cuff with a gesture that subtly betrayed a trembling hand, the control slowly coming back. "And it's the right thing." His gaze dropped to the wet hem of Emily's pants and rose again, with a silent trace of guilt etched between his brows. Two staff members whispered near the elevator. One recognized the name Carter on the list, the other raised his eyebrows, impressed. Megan, who had managed to enter the lobby after circling past security, stood a few feet away, watching the scene with a mix of surprise and stubbornness. For a second, it looked like she'd say, "I told you so," but instead, what escaped her lips, soft, nearly silent, was a tongue click that stopped just short of full judgment. The echo of her earlier words, "In real life, nobody helps anyone," still buzzed in Emily's mind, but now it sounded different, like glass that cracked just enough to let in a sliver of light. The receptionist turned the tablet and confirmed, "Ms. Carter, please confirm your email. The team will reach out today with a new date and time." Emily repeated the email, her fingers still gripping the phone like it might slip away. Paul nodded to her one last time, professional but somehow still human, the same look that had, minutes ago, nearly lost its balance on a rainy sidewalk. Then he returned to the group, already putting back on the mask of someone who carries their world on their shoulders. Emily stepped back, then again, her whole body registering what had just happened. As she touched the revolving door, she realized her hands were still cold, and the memory of the brown hat, the object George had clung to like a thread of memory, flashed through her mind like a promise. The rain met her once more with Seattle's usual indifference, but this time something in the air felt different. It wasn't a yes, not yet, but it wasn't a no either. It was a real, weighty maybe written down on a list with her full name. And for the first time in a long time, that maybe was enough to let her breathe a little easier. Emily sank into the torn bus seat, feeling the exposed foam poke at her thigh. The windows, fogged by rain and the humid heat of dozens of crammed bodies, revealed only blurry glimpses of the city, buildings, signs, traffic lights. The engine's rumble blended with the constant hum of voices and coughing, but she barely heard any of it. Her mind was still in the lobby of Whitmore Enterprises, replaying the unexpected moment when Paul Whitmore, in front of everyone, had asked them to write down her name. That had been different. But the brief warmth soon faded, replaced by the familiar weight of routine. She got off 3 stops later, huddling beneath her hood, and walked the block to the small 3-story building where Megan's apartment was. The hallway reeked of reheated food and cigarettes. Inside, she passed through the messy living room, tossed her backpack into a corner, and sank onto the pull-out couch that had been her bed for 3 months. The coarse fabric had already molded to her body. The backrest had a tear covered with duct tape, and the right side sagged so much it felt like falling into a hole. The stack of overdue bills sat on the low table. Internet, credit card, an old utility notice from her former apartment. Emily took a deep breath and, in a reflexive gesture, pulled out her phone to open LinkedIn. Over 50 resumes sent in the past week, and the replies were always the same. Automated thank you messages, vague promises to keep your information on file. She had memorized the wording, could recite it mentally. As the screen loaded, flashes of the past year surfaced, not as organized memories, but like jump cuts in a disordered film. The day the landlord knocked with the eviction notice, saying, "I don't have a choice," in a tone so dry, it sounded like it wasn't even his own. The rush to pack her things, cramming scratched pots and worn-out clothes into trash bags because she couldn't afford proper boxes. Nights on Megan's couch, listening to the upstairs neighbor's footsteps and the cries of a baby she never saw, trying to fall asleep before anxiety crushed her chest. What hurt most wasn't just the hardship, it was the small, accumulated humiliations. Temp jobs that paid $10 an hour, cleaning budget motels, fill-in waitressing at crowded events where guests didn't even glance at her face, late-night deliveries in distant neighborhoods where she was afraid to even park her bike. She remembered a suited customer at a restaurant who snapped his fingers for her to pick up a dropped napkin. Or the cafe manager who, in front of everyone, asked if she knew how to smile for real, or if that serious face was permanent. Every time she had to accept another dead-end job, she told herself it was temporary. But temporary had stretched into months, and still she kept going, filling out forms, adapting resumes, writing cover letters no one would read. She spent countless nights trying to align her profile with job postings, like the motivational articles said to do, and would greet the morning with burning eyes, only to find another "thank you for your interest" waiting in her inbox. She opened her wallet now. Inside, one $20 bill, 2 ones and a few coins. Just enough for a cheap dinner and a round trip downtown if she got called in. She closed the wallet slowly, as if the gesture might multiply the money. Next to it, on the table, sat a napkin with a number Megan had scribbled down, some gig at a gas station. "It doesn't pay much, but it's cash," she had said. Emily knew what that meant. Hours on her feet, the stench of gasoline clinging to her skin, and stares that lingered too long from certain customers, but it was what there was. In the beginning, she believed that with her degree in business and experience in hospitality, she'd find something better quickly. Seattle had a busy market, startups, big companies. The problem was, to get a good position, you needed connections, and she had none. Her former co-workers had moved on and rarely responded to messages. Family? Just a distant cousin in another state with his own struggles. She remembered her last trial shift, an entire day at a convenience store to prove she could keep up with the pace. At the end, the manager said the register balanced, the customer service was solid, but they went with someone more aligned with the brand. Emily went home with aching feet and a bag of peanuts the cashier let her take, like a consolation prize. Now, there on the couch, phone in hand, she felt the weight of every failed attempt. But she also remembered, with a strange twist in her gut, the moment when Paul had said in the lobby, "This isn't a favor, it's gratitude." She didn't know if she believed it. Men like him didn't live in the same world as her, but she couldn't deny that for the first time in ages, someone with power had looked at her directly and hadn't been in a hurry to look away. Megan walked into the room, tossing her bag onto the armchair. "Still thinking about your SUV prince?" she asked, half laughing, half sarcastic. "It's not that." Emily adjusted her hood, trying to avoid the conversation. "He just did what he said he would." Megan scoffed. "We'll see. Promises are easy. I still think you should have left the old guy. A missed interview is a missed chance." Emily didn't answer. She picked up the crumpled envelope of resumes Megan had returned earlier and ran her hand over it, trying to smooth the creases. She'd spent so much time printing flawless copies, making sure each sheet was clean and unmarked, like that detail might make the difference. Now, the wrinkled paper felt like too obvious a metaphor for her life. Deep down, she knew Megan's words held a cruel kind of truth. No one had shown up to save her over the past year. Every tiny victory had been wrenched out of the world, and most had faded fast. But there was still a part of her that refused to believe the world was only this harsh place. It was that part, stubborn, maybe foolish, that had stepped into the street to hold on to George Whitmore and wait in the rain until someone came for him. While Megan chatted on the phone in the kitchen, Emily lay back on the couch and stared at the peeling ceiling. The rain still drummed on the window, muffling the noises of the building. Her body felt heavy, but her mind was racing. She knew that if HR from Whitmore Enterprises really called, it wouldn't just be another shot in the dark. It would be a chance to break a cycle that had gone on far too long. And for the first time in months, she drifted off, not thinking about what she had lost, but about what might still be possible. Steam rose from the expensive cup of coffee, still piping hot, on the glass table in the penthouse. Paul Whitmore watched the city of Seattle through the floor-to-ceiling windows that surrounded the room. The bay shimmered in the distance, but the view felt sterile, like a magazine photo that had no smell, no texture, no sound. Behind him, the minimalist kitchen showcased smooth, cold surfaces, so pristine they looked like they had never been used. The life he had built was comfortable in the most obvious sense. There was space, there was silence, there was everything money could buy, but in practice it was just a set of wide, expensive walls holding a man alone. The king-sized bed always rumpled on only one side, the dining table that never held more than one plate. The wine bottles opened and forgotten halfway through. On his phone screen, reports and charts competed for attention with unread messages from his team. He scrolled with his thumb mechanically, replying to what was urgent, ignoring the rest. In the corner, a digital reminder flashed. Weekly visit with Dad, rescheduled, for the third time this month. Paul knew he relied too much on the caregiving team to look after George. He justified it to himself with work demands, travel, business obligations. But deep down, he knew it was also a way of avoiding the fragility of his father, the weight of memories slipping away. As he sank into that line of thought, across the city, Emily Carter was hunched behind the counter of a cheap diner, wearing a borrowed uniform and a wrinkled apron. It was a 2-day gig, just enough to make a few bucks and cover her share of the rent for the month. The diner smelled of recycled grease and burnt coffee, and the sticky floor clung to her soles with every step. She smiled at a customer who didn't smile back, jotted down the order, and returned to the kitchen. The wall clock showed 3 more hours left in her shift. Sweat clung to strands of hair on her forehead, and the hot air radiated from the griddles that never stopped sizzling. At the register, her co-worker, an older woman with a weary expression, commented on the weather, the slow business, the owner's foul mood. Emily just nodded. On break, she checked her phone and opened her notifications. Nothing from Whitmore Enterprises HR. Part of her was already bracing for the familiar silence, the one that always followed a "we'll be in touch." But deep down, a tiny thread of hope remained knotted inside her, impossible to untie. The next day, fate decided to bring their worlds closer, without either of them realizing it. Emily, carrying a bag of groceries, walked past a modern coffee shop downtown, one of those places with a glass storefront and a minimalist sign. Inside, she spotted George sitting alone at a table, a cup in front of him staring blankly out the window. She stopped, unsure whether to go in. Maybe he wouldn't remember her. Maybe he wasn't alone. But before she could decide, a reflection in the glass showed Paul approaching with 2 cups, setting one down in front of his father and saying something she couldn't hear. His posture was softer than the first time they met, but there was still a layer of stiffness. Emily looked away and kept walking, but a weight settled in her chest. Something about that scene unsettled her. It wasn't just the memory of the missed interview, it was the recognition, even from a distance, of the loneliness hidden in those quiet gestures. Paul, on the other hand, noticed a flicker of movement on the sidewalk. A woman's silhouette, her hood pulled over her head. There was something familiar in the way she held the grocery bag close to her chest, in the quick pace she used to escape the rain. He frowned slightly but said nothing. In the days that followed, that brief glimpse lingered. For Emily, it felt like brushing past a book whose beginning she knew, but whose ending was still a mystery. For Paul, it was like seeing a face in a dream and trying to remember where he'd seen it in real life. They both returned to their routines, but the silent encounter deepened the invisible tension between them, quietly setting the stage for the inevitable moment when their paths would cross again. The call came on a grey morning, the kind where Seattle seemed to have forgotten what sunlight was. Emily was sitting on the pull-out couch in a sweatshirt and thick socks, trying to balance her laptop on her knees while replying to yet another generic job posting. The ringtone broke the monotony, and when she answered, the polished, precise voice on the other end said, "Good morning, Miss Carter. This is Rebecca from HR at Whitmore Enterprises. Mr. Whitmore asked us to schedule a new interview with you, tomorrow at 9 a.m., same address." Emily blinked, processing each word as if it were in a foreign language. "Yes, of course, I can be there." "Great. Please bring an ID and a printed resume. If you have any questions, my extension is in the confirmation email I'm sending now. Have a good day." The call ended before she could even say thank you again. Her heart beat faster, but there was no time to celebrate. The memory of being late last time still stung. This time she promised herself she'd be early, flawless. The next morning, she got up before sunrise. She wore the best blouse she owned, a pair of wrinkle-free slacks, and tied her hair back in a simple bun. She dabbed on some lipstick to mask the fatigue and spritzed the last of the perfume she'd saved for important occasions. She left home an hour early, ignoring the cold that burned her face and hands. The lobby of Whitmore Enterprises was quieter than on her first visit. The glass walls reflected the white glow of the overhead lights, and the pristine floor seemed to amplify the click of heels and footsteps crossing the space. Emily approached the front desk, where a security guard greeted her and escorted her to a private elevator. The 20th floor opened into a spacious waiting room, with leather chairs and a panoramic view of the city. A receptionist gestured for her to wait. Emily's hands were cold, and she gripped her resume tightly to keep them from trembling. A few minutes later, a side door opened. Paul Whitmore appeared alone, holding a black folder. The dark grey suit, the expensive watch, the upright posture, everything about him radiated calculated confidence. But when he saw her, there was a brief softening in his gaze, too quick to seem intentional. "Miss Carter," he said, not smiling, just nodding. "Shall we talk?" Emily nodded and followed him into a glass-walled office. Inside, he gestured toward the chair across from his desk and sat down, opening the folder. "So," he began, flipping through some pages as if he already knew exactly what they said, "you mentioned you worked in hospitality. Relevant experience. Why did you leave?" The question, though standard, carried a tone that felt like he was probing for more than just an answer. Emily took a steady breath. "I was fired." "Why?" His voice was calm but direct, almost cold. "I stood up for a co-worker. The manager thought I was causing trouble." She kept her tone even, choosing not to go into details. Paul studied her for a moment, his face unreadable. "And since then?" "Temp work. Whatever I could find." The resume in her hands felt heavier than paper should. "But I'm looking for something stable." He closed the folder and leaned forward slightly. "Hard to believe someone with your background hasn't found anything better." The words, though spoken softly, landed like a challenge. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She pressed her lips together, working to stay composed. "Maybe it's because I don't know the right people." For a moment, the silence between them was sharp. Paul held her gaze, as if measuring not just her words, but her resolve. Then he leaned back in his chair. Honesty is a start. He jotted a quick note on a notepad and stood, signaling the conversation was over. Let's see how you do in a practical evaluation. HR will follow up. Emily stood too, smoothing her blouse to hide the tension in her body. Thank you for your time, Mr. Whitmore. He merely nodded and walked her to the door. No smile, no word of encouragement. As she stepped out of the room, she felt that even with a second chance, this wouldn't be an easy road, and from the way he looked at her while closing the folder, she had the sense that was exactly what Paul intended to test. Paul was in the office late at night, the city reflected in the windows behind him like a mosaic of cold lights. The floors above and below were nearly empty, except for a few lingering employees and the distant hum of robotic vacuums gliding through the halls. He was scrolling through the internal database, looking up information on old contracts, when a familiar name appeared on the screen. Carter, Emily. The record wasn't from Central HR, but from a file linked to a luxury hotel chain that Whitmore Enterprises controlled indirectly. Paul opened the document and read, termination, reason, disruptive behavior, and insubordination. The notes were vague, written by a regional manager he barely remembered approving. Curious, he clicked into the history and found internal reports. One about an incident where Emily had confronted the manager while defending a co-worker against an influential client. Another stating that the problem had strained the hotel's relationship with a corporate partner. Paul realized the partner was one of his own subsidiaries, and that at the time he had signed off on the staff cuts without even knowing the names. The realization hit with an uncomfortable weight. The path that had brought Emily to that interview room hadn't been just bad luck. He himself, indirectly and distantly, had helped push her there. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and dialed HR. Rebecca, I need Carter, Emily, in my office first thing tomorrow. Tell her it's about the selection process. The next morning, Emily entered Paul's office cautiously. He was standing by his desk, no jacket, just a dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves. His expression, however, was more serious than during their last meeting. Have a seat, please. He gestured toward the chair but didn't sit right away. I want to talk about your employment history. Emily tensed, adjusting the resume on her lap. Of course. I found out last night that you worked at one of the hotels in our network and were let go, unfairly. He said the last word carefully, as if testing its weight. Why didn't you mention it? Emily looked up, steady. Because it wouldn't make a difference. Those things don't change. They do if... Not for people like me, Mr. Whitmore. She cut him off, her voice still measured but heavy. You only look down when someone's in the way, and when you do, it's to push them aside. The words hung in the air, sharp. Paul felt the blow more deeply than he expected. The image of his father alone at home, the postponed visits, the deliberate distance, all of it mixed with the weight of years making decisions without seeing the faces they affected. He took a breath, trying to stay composed. I didn't know. Exactly. Emily leaned forward, elbows on her knees. And I bet for a lot of other names on that list, you don't know either. There was a long silence. Paul held her gaze, but this time there was no chill in his eyes. There was something between anger and discomfort, and a flicker of respect. Emily didn't back down, didn't look away. Maybe I should know, he admitted finally in a quiet voice. And maybe that's the part of the problem I need to fix. Emily stood before he could say more. Good luck with that. She slid the resume into her bag without waiting for an invitation to leave. Paul remained alone, staring at the reflection in the neighboring building's glass. Her words kept echoing like both an accusation and a challenge he wasn't sure he was ready to face. That conversation hadn't just exposed an injustice, it had struck a blind spot he'd been avoiding for years, and somehow Paul knew that nothing would be the same after that. Paul's office was lit only by the ambient glow spilling in through the windows. From the 20th floor, the city looked like a silent game board, dotted with headlights and reflections over the water. He was seated at his desk, but he wasn't working. His thumb drifted across his phone screen, scrolling through call logs and the open email containing Emily's employment history. The conversation from the day before was still etched in his mind, the way she had said, "You only look down when someone's in the way." It was rare for someone to speak to him like that, rarer still to feel like he deserved it. Paul closed his laptop and stood. The decision came without fanfare, just a certainty that settled heavily on his shoulders. If he truly wanted to give Emily a chance, it had to be real, not symbolic. 2 days later, Emily received a call from HR. "Miss Carter, this is Rebecca. Mr. Whitmore has asked that you report to the office Monday to begin a trial period in the administrative department. It's a temporary role, but with the possibility of becoming permanent." Emily gripped the phone tightly, her voice catching. "A trial in the administrative department?" "Yes, project support functions. It's a real position, not a training assignment. He wants to see how you perform in day-to-day operations." For a moment, she said nothing. Pride and doubt tangled with the quiet relief of finally having something solid. "All right. I'll be there." On Monday, the atmosphere at the office felt more intense than she remembered. Glass-walled rooms revealed meetings in progress. Employees moved briskly with folders and tablets. Emily was shown to a desk near the windows where a supervisor named Harris explained her tasks, updating spreadsheets, contacting vendors, and tracking delivery timelines. At first, she worked in silence, throwing herself into the tasks with the focus of someone who knew even the smallest mistake could be used against her. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and each call was made with a firm, clear tone. At the end of the day, Harris said, without ceremony, "Quick adjustment. Let's see if you keep up." But Harris wasn't the one watching most closely. Paul passed by her area twice that day. The first time he merely glanced over, a nod so slight it could have gone unnoticed. The second time, he paused to ask, "Any difficulties?" "No, sir," Emily replied professionally. "Everything's clear." He nodded but didn't leave right away. He lingered a few seconds in silence, as if he wanted to say something beyond the standard script. Then he moved on. In the days that followed, his presence became more regular. Sometimes, he showed up at the end of the day to review reports at her desk. Other times, he asked her to join quick meetings. Emily noticed small changes in his demeanor, less rush in his speech, more attention to what others said. Once, during a supplier meeting, Paul cut off a disparaging comment made by a partner about the admin team. "Everyone here has value," he said curtly. The tone made it clear he wouldn't tolerate disrespect. Emily didn't say anything, but she noticed. Maybe he was trying to change, but she wasn't ready to let herself believe it just yet. One rainy afternoon, she went downstairs to grab a coffee and returned to find Paul in the hallway, standing in front of a screen displaying company performance charts. He looked lost in thought. When he saw her, he gestured for her to come closer. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a chart. 3 projects are behind schedule due to communication breakdowns between teams. I want you to review the reports and figure out where the info is falling through the cracks." "Me?" She raised an eyebrow. "You're good with details, and from what I've seen, you're not afraid to call out mistakes." Emily nodded, surprised by the trust. She spent the next few hours immersed in the reports, highlighting gaps and suggesting improvements. At the end of the day, she handed everything in. Paul read her notes right then and there, and a small curve tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the closest she'd seen. Good work. The praise was brief, but it echoed deeper than she wanted to admit. She still didn't trust him, not fully. She didn't know if this was part of a real change or just another test. But for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was building something that wouldn't be taken away from her the next week. The news of the scandal hit like thunder on an afternoon that had started quietly. Emily was finishing a report when she heard hurried footsteps in the hallway and fragments of tense conversations. Data breach. The department's fault. The press is already calling. Moments later, Rebecca from HR rushed by, arms full of folders, not even noticing Emily sitting there. Minutes after that, Harris entered the admin area with a tense look on his face. "Carter, Mr. Whitmore wants to see you. Now." Emily's heart raced, but she stood up and walked down the hall toward the glass door at the end. Inside, Paul was on the phone, speaking quietly, his jaw clenched. When he hung up, he motioned for her to come in. "Close the door." His voice was low, but carried a weight that left no room for hesitation. She obeyed, and Paul walked over to the desk, placing his hands on the surface like he was holding up the world itself. "One of our directors made decisions that violated security protocols. That opened the door to a customer data breach." He took a deep breath. "I could just point the finger at him and be done with it. But that would take down a lot of people who didn't even know what was happening." Emily frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" Paul looked at her, and there was something in his eyes. It wasn't cold, and it wasn't calculated. It was resolve. "I'm going to take responsibility, publicly. But that could cost you your position." Her surprise was real. "I know." He straightened his posture. "It's not the first time I've realized I have to pay for something I let happen, but maybe it's the first time I actually want to." Emily stayed quiet, trying to process it. As much as she had distrusted him, she knew this wasn't an empty gesture. In the corporate world, owning up to failure voluntarily was rare and expensive. By the next day, the media already had the story. Headlines popped up on news sites. Whitmore Enterprises CEO takes blame for security breach, announces temporary leave. Shareholders reacted cautiously, and some analysts called the move a calculated attempt to preserve brand image. But Emily knew there was more to it. At the office, the mood was strange. People whispered in the hallways. Some praised Paul's courage, others criticized the fallout. When he passed through the admin area, everyone went silent. He stopped at her desk. "The board will appoint an interim replacement." His tone was calm, but his eyes looked exhausted. "I may not return to this role, but I don't regret it." Emily didn't know what to say right away. She just nodded, feeling a tightness in her chest. Later that afternoon, she went down to the lobby and found Paul alone, leaning against the glass wall, watching the rain fall over the city. He was without his jacket, his shirt slightly wrinkled, as if he'd given up on keeping up appearances. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, straight to the point. He turned slowly. "Because for a long time I thought power was meant to protect me. Now I know that if it doesn't protect others, it's worthless." There was a heavy silence, filled only by the sound of rain and traffic outside. Emily realized that the man in front of her wasn't quite the same one who had looked at her with cold detachment the day she helped George on the street. Something in him had broken and been rebuilt. "You don't have to believe me now," Paul said quietly, "but I needed you to know it's not just for them. It's for you, too." Emily felt the words reach her in a way she didn't want to admit. And as she watched him walk away to face an uncertain future, she realized that this choice, risking everything, was the clearest proof yet that he really was changing. George sat in the armchair by the window, the soft afternoon light slipping in through the half-open curtains. Paul's apartment felt warmer that day. Maybe it was the scent of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen, or the faint sound of an old song playing on a radio in the corner. Emily stood beside the couch, helping George adjust the brown hat in his hands. He ran his fingers along the brim as if he knew every stitch by heart. Paul entered the room quietly, no longer carrying the weight of the position he had left behind. He wore a simple shirt and jeans, and his expression had changed. There was no longer that rigid tension in his jaw, just a quiet calm, almost uncertain. When George saw him, a rare light sparked in the old man's eyes. "Son," his voice came out slow but steady. "You found what was missing." Paul stopped, took a deep breath and walked over. He knelt in front of his father and held his hands, resting the hat between them. Emily watched in silence, a lump forming in her throat. "I think I did," Paul replied, glancing briefly at Emily before looking back at George. The old man smiled faintly and, with a careful motion, placed the hat on Paul's head. It was more than just handing over an object. It was the passing of something far more meaningful. Trust, affection, a bond rebuilt. Emily blinked to hold back tears. Megan's words echoed in her mind. In real life, nobody helps anyone. And for the first time she could answer back with certainty. Not always. Paul stood and walked over to Emily. They stood face to face, and she noticed he carried the same look he had in the lobby when he asked for her name to be written down. Only now, there was more warmth, more vulnerability. "Thank you for not turning your back," he said. "Not just on my father, but on me too." She gave a gentle smile. "I think you've realized it wasn't just your father who needed to be found." Paul let out a quiet laugh, the kind that escapes when there's nothing left to guard. Then he held out his hand. Emily took it without hesitation. They walked out together, George between them, moving slowly down the hallway toward the door. Outside, Seattle's light drizzle was falling, turning the asphalt into a rippling mirror. Paul adjusted the hat on his head and opened the umbrella. Emily linked arms with his father, and Paul held her hand under the sheltering fabric. None of them spoke during those first steps. They didn't need to. The new story they were beginning didn't require urgency, only presence. And in that silence, rich with meaning, Emily knew that after so many losses, she had finally found something and someone worth holding on to.
What it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.